My name is Rachel, and at 29 years old, I thought I understood the true meaning of family loyalty. That was before my sister Chloe looked me straight in the eye and said those 4 words that would haunt me for months. It's just a loan. She was talking about my $75,000 wedding fund, money I had painstakingly saved over 6 years for what was supposed to be the most important day of my life. What I didn't know was that those words were the beginning of the most devastating betrayal I could ever imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began, because to truly understand the depth of what happened, you need to know who Chloe and I were to each other. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, as the daughters of 2 hardworking teachers, Chloe and I were inseparable. She was 3 years older than me, with wild curly auburn hair that matched her fierce personality, while I was the quieter one with straight blonde hair and what my mother called old soul eyes. Despite our differences, we were each other's constant companions, especially after our father passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was 16 and Chloe was 19. Our mother Linda did her best to hold our family together, but losing Dad left a financial strain that we all felt deeply. She worked double shifts at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade, taking on tutoring jobs in the evenings just to keep our modest 2-bedroom house. During those difficult years, Chloe and I made a pact that we would always look out for each other, no matter what life threw our way. We promised that neither of us would ever struggle alone the way our mother had to after Dad died. Chloe was always the dreamer between us. She had grand plans of becoming a fashion designer, sketching elaborate dress designs in notebooks that she carried everywhere. After high school, she moved to Los Angeles to attend design school, while I stayed in Portland to study business administration at Portland State University. Even with the distance, we talked every single day, sharing our hopes, fears, and dreams through late-night phone calls that sometimes lasted until sunrise. I chose business because I craved stability and security in a way that only someone who had watched their family struggle financially could understand. While Chloe chased her artistic dreams in California, I methodically built a career in project management at a tech startup. By the time I was 25, I was earning a solid salary and had developed what some might call an obsession with financial planning and saving. The wedding fund started almost by accident. I had been dating my college sweetheart, Marcus, for 4 years, and while we weren't engaged yet, marriage felt inevitable. Marcus was a software engineer with the same practical mindset as me, and we often talked about our future together with the kind of detailed planning that probably would have bored other couples. One evening, as we sat in my apartment planning a weekend trip to the coast, Marcus mentioned how his coworker had gone into debt planning his wedding. That conversation sparked something in me. I opened a separate savings account the very next week, determined that when Marcus and I did get married, we would have the wedding of our dreams without going into debt or asking our families for help. I started small, transferring $200 from each paycheck into what I privately called my wedding fund. As my salary increased with promotions and job changes, so did my contributions. Some months, when I received bonuses or completed freelance projects, I would deposit larger amounts. The fund became more than just money to me. It represented security, independence, and the promise of a beautiful beginning to the life Marcus and I were building together. Every dollar I saved felt like an investment in our future, a way of ensuring that our wedding day would be everything we had dreamed of without the financial stress that had plagued my childhood. Chloe knew about the fund because I told her everything. During our weekly video calls, I would excitedly update her on my progress, and she would cheer me on with genuine enthusiasm. When I reached the $10,000 mark, she insisted we celebrate with a virtual toast over FaceTime. When I hit $25,000, she sent me a congratulatory card with a drawing of a bride that she had designed herself. Her support meant everything to me, especially since our mother worried that I was being too focused on money instead of just enjoying my relationship with Marcus. By my 28th birthday, the wedding fund had grown to $60,000. Marcus and I had been talking seriously about engagement, looking at rings during casual weekend browsing sessions at jewelry stores. The fund felt like a safety net that would allow us to say yes to the perfect venue, the perfect dress, the perfect photographer, without having to compromise our vision or stress about the cost. Meanwhile, Chloe's life in Los Angeles had been a roller coaster of highs and lows. She had graduated from design school with impressive credentials and initially found work as an assistant to a prominent fashion designer in Beverly Hills. For a few years, everything seemed to be going according to her plan. She lived in a trendy apartment in West Hollywood, attended glamorous industry events, and regularly sent me photos of celebrities wearing pieces she had helped create. But the fashion industry proved to be as unpredictable as it was exciting. When the designer she worked for lost several major clients due to a scandal, Chloe found herself unemployed along with most of the staff. She struggled to find another position at the same level, taking on freelance work and part-time retail jobs to make ends meet. The apartment in West Hollywood became too expensive, and she moved to a smaller place in a less desirable neighborhood. During this difficult period, Chloe's pride kept her from asking for help directly. She would mention during our calls that work was a bit slow or that she was between projects, but she never admitted the full extent of her financial struggles. I offered to help several times, but she always brushed off my concerns with a laugh and a change of subject. She was determined to make it on her own, just as she always had. The turning point came just after I had reached my goal of $75,000 in the wedding fund. Marcus had finally proposed during a romantic weekend getaway to Crater Lake, presenting me with a vintage sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I was over the moon, not just because of the engagement, but because I knew we had the financial foundation to plan the wedding we had always talked about. I called Chloe immediately after Marcus proposed, practically screaming with excitement as I described the proposal and showed off my ring through the phone camera. She seemed genuinely thrilled for me, asking detailed questions about our timeline and our initial ideas for the wedding. We spent over an hour on that call, with Chloe sketching dress ideas while we talked, then promising to help me find the perfect designer for my gown. 2 weeks later, Chloe called me in tears. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was in the middle of researching wedding venues when my phone rang. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was terribly wrong. She was sobbing so hard that I could barely understand what she was saying. Through her tears, Chloe explained that she had been evicted from her apartment. She had fallen behind on rent during a particularly lean period and hadn't been able to catch up despite finding some freelance work. The landlord had given her 3 days to come up with $4,000 in back rent or move out. She had already spent the last week sleeping on a friend's couch, but that arrangement was only temporary. Even worse, she had been offered an incredible opportunity to work as a design assistant for a major fashion house. But
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Physician required her to have a stable address and be available to start immediately. It was exactly the kind of break she had been waiting for, the chance to get her career back on track and finally achieve the success she had always dreamed of. As she explained her situation, my heart broke for her. This was my sister, my best friend, the person who had supported every dream I had ever had. She was so close to getting her life back together, and all she needed was a little help to bridge the gap. Then came the request that would change everything between us. Through her tears, Chloe asked if she could borrow $15,000 from my wedding fund. She promised it would only be for a few months, just long enough for her to get established in the new job and save up enough to pay me back. She even offered to pay interest, though I immediately told her that would never be necessary. The amount she needed seemed reasonable compared to the $75,000 I had saved. I would still have $60,000 for the wedding, which was more than enough for everything Marcus and I had planned. More importantly, this was my sister in crisis, and I had the power to help her when she needed it most. I didn't hesitate for even a moment. Of course, I told her, family takes care of family. That's what Dad would have wanted. The relief in her voice was palpable as she thanked me over and over, promising that she would pay me back as soon as possible. We arranged for me to transfer the money the next day, and she assured me that she would have the signed lease for a new apartment by the weekend. What I didn't know was that $15,000 was just the beginning. The transfer went smoothly, and Chloe called me that evening to confirm she had received the money. She sounded like her old self again, excited and optimistic about the future. She had already put down a deposit on a studio apartment in a decent neighborhood and was planning to start her new job the following Monday. For the next few weeks, everything seemed to be going perfectly. Chloe sent me photos of her new place, which was small but charming, with big windows and enough space for her to set up a design workspace. She was clearly thriving in her new position, working long hours but loving every minute of it. During our calls, she would tell me about the project she was working on and the connections she was making in the industry. Meanwhile, Marcus and I had set our wedding date for the following October, giving us just over a year to plan everything. With $60,000 still in the fund, we felt confident about our budget and started looking at venues and vendors. The wedding planning process was everything I had imagined it would be, exciting and romantic and full of possibilities. About 6 weeks after I had lent Chloe the $15,000, she called me with another crisis. This time, her voice was calm and matter-of-fact, which somehow made the request even more unsettling. She explained that her new job required her to attend several industry events and networking functions, and she needed professional attire that she simply couldn't afford. Additionally, her laptop had crashed, taking with it several important design files, and she needed to replace it immediately to keep up with her work responsibilities. The total she needed this time was $8,000, again presented as a temporary loan that she would repay once she received her first substantial paycheck from the new position. This request felt different from the first one. The initial $15,000 had been for an emergency, a genuine crisis that required immediate intervention. This second request felt more like an investment in her career, which made me slightly uncomfortable even as I recognized its importance. I found myself hesitating for the first time, not because I didn't want to help Chloe, but because the pattern of requests was starting to worry me. When I gently suggested that she might want to look into payment plans for the laptop or consider shopping at more affordable stores for work clothes, she became defensive. She reminded me of all the times she had supported me over the years, from helping me through my breakup with my high school boyfriend to encouraging me to apply for the job that had launched my career. She pointed out that I still had plenty of money left for the wedding and that her career was finally taking off thanks to my help. Her arguments made sense, and my guilt over questioning her request ultimately won out over my practical concerns. I transferred the $8,000, bringing my total loans to Chloe to $23,000 and reducing my wedding fund to $52,000. This time, there were no enthusiastic thank you calls or photos of purchases. Chloe simply confirmed that she had received the money and moved on to other topics during our next conversation. When I tried to bring up a timeline for repayment, she assured me that everything was under control and that I shouldn't worry about it. The third request came just 2 months later, right in the middle of Marcus and my engagement party planning. Chloe called on a Sunday morning, waking me up with news of yet another financial emergency. This time, she claimed that her roommate had moved out unexpectedly, leaving her responsible for the full rent on an apartment she couldn't afford alone. She needed $12,000 to cover the rent differential for several months, while she found a new roommate or decided whether to move to a smaller place. Once again, she framed it as a temporary situation that would be resolved quickly. By this point, my wedding fund had become Chloe's personal emergency fund, and I was starting to feel the strain, both financially and emotionally. The requests were coming more frequently, and each one seemed to require more money than the last. When I tried to suggest alternatives, like having her move back to Portland temporarily, or helping her find financial counseling resources, she became upset and accused me of not understanding the pressure she was facing in Los Angeles. The conversation escalated into our first real fight in years. Chloe accused me of being selfish and caring more about a single day of celebration than her entire future. She pointed out that I was lucky to have a stable job and a supportive fiancé, while she was struggling to build a career in one of the most competitive industries in the world. Her words stung because there was truth in them. I did have advantages that she didn't, and I had always been the more financially conservative one between us. But I also felt like my generosity was being taken for granted, and my own dreams were being dismissed as less important than hers. Despite my reservations, I ultimately agreed to the third loan. The thought of my sister being evicted again, especially when she was working so hard to rebuild her career, was unbearable. I transferred the $12,000, bringing the total amount I had lent her to $35,000. My wedding fund, which had once represented security and dreams, now felt like a rapidly depleting resource that I had no control over. Marcus noticed my stress about the money situation, and when I finally explained what was happening, he was supportive but concerned. He trusted my judgment about helping family, but he could see how the situation was affecting me. The fourth and largest request came just 4 months before our wedding date. By this point, Marcus and I had already put deposits down on our venue, photographer, and caterer, based on the assumption that we would have at least $50,000 available for all our expenses. We had carefully planned every aspect of our budget, and any significant reduction in available funds would mean making painful compromises. Chloe's call came on a Wednesday evening while Marcus and I were addressing save-the-date cards. She sounded different this time, more desperate and frantic than I had ever heard her. Through tears, she explained that she had been offered an incredible opportunity to launch her own fashion line with a well-known investor, but she needed to come up with $25,000 as a good-faith investment to secure the partnership. This was everything she had ever worked toward, she explained. The investor had seen her work and believed in her talent, but the fashion industry required significant upfront capital to get a new line off the ground. The $25,000 would cover initial production costs, marketing expenses, and her living expenses for the first few months while the business got established. She painted a picture of the success that would follow this investment. Within a year, she projected, her line would be profitable enough for her to pay me back in full with interest. She talked about hiring me to help manage the business side of her company, offering Marcus and me the wedding of our dreams as a thank you for believing in her. The request was devastating not just because of the amount, but because of the timing. Taking $25,000 out of my wedding fund just months before the wedding would mean canceling or drastically scaling back almost everything Marcus and I had planned. When I tried to explain this to Chloe, she became more upset than I had ever seen her. She accused me of sabotaging her dreams and choosing a single day of celebration over her entire future. She reminded me that I could always have another wedding later, when we had more money, but opportunities like this investment partnership came once in a lifetime. The conversation went on for hours, with both of us crying and saying things we would later regret. Chloe threatened to cut contact with me if I didn't help her, saying that she would never forgive me for abandoning her when she needed me most. She claimed that our father would be ashamed of me for turning my back on family. That last accusation hit me like a physical blow. Our father had always emphasized the importance of family loyalty, and the thought that he would disapprove of my actions was almost unbearable. In my emotional state, I convinced myself that maybe Chloe was right. Maybe I was being selfish by prioritizing my wedding over her career. Against every instinct I had, against Marcus's gentle advice to wait and think about it, I agreed to lend Chloe the $25,000. The transfer brought my total loans to her to $60,000, leaving me with only $15,000 for my wedding, which was now just 4 months away. Marcus was devastated when I told him what I had decided. He didn't try to change my mind, but I could see the disappointment and worry in his eyes. We spent that entire night recalculating our wedding budget, trying to figure out how to make $15,000 cover expenses we had originally planned to pay for with $50,000. It meant canceling the venue we had fallen in love with and finding something much less expensive. It meant cutting our guest list in half and choosing a less experienced photographer. Most painfully, it meant giving up the dream wedding dress I had already ordered, a custom design that cost more than our entire revised budget. The sacrifices were heartbreaking, but I consoled myself with the knowledge that I was helping my sister achieve her dreams. I imagined the success she would find with her fashion line, and the gratitude she would feel toward me for making it possible. I pictured her paying me back in full, maybe even enough for Marcus and me to have a vow renewal ceremony in a few years with all the elements we were giving up now. But as the weeks passed after that final transfer, something strange started happening. Chloe's communication with me became sporadic and evasive. Our weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. When we did talk, she seemed distracted and unwilling to discuss details about her new business venture. When I asked about the investor or the timeline for launching her fashion line, she gave vague answers about legal paperwork and production delays. When I inquired about her repayment plan, she assured me that everything was on track but avoided giving specific dates or amounts. 2 months before my scaled-down wedding, I realized that I hadn't heard from Chloe in over 3 weeks. My calls went straight to voicemail, and my texts received delayed, brief responses that didn't really answer my questions. A growing sense of unease settled in my stomach, a feeling that something was very wrong. It was Marcus who suggested that maybe I should check on Chloe in person. He had vacation days saved up, and we could afford a quick trip to Los Angeles to see how she was doing and hopefully get some clarity about the repayment situation. The timing would be tight with wedding preparations, but my worry about my sister was starting to overshadow everything else. I called Chloe to let her know we were planning to visit, expecting her to be excited about seeing us and meeting Marcus in person for the first time. Instead, she seemed panicked and made excuses about why a visit wouldn't work. She claimed to be traveling for business and suggested we postpone the trip until after my wedding. Her reaction only increased my concern. This wasn't the sister I knew, the one who would have been thrilled to show off her new life and introduce me to her friends and colleagues. Something was definitely wrong, and I needed to find out what it was. Against Chloe's wishes, Marcus and I booked flights to Los Angeles for the following weekend. I was determined to see my sister face to face and get honest answers about what was happening with her life and with my money. The flight to Los Angeles felt endless, my mind racing with possibilities of what I might discover about Chloe's situation. Marcus held my hand during takeoff, sensing my anxiety without needing an explanation. He had been incredibly patient throughout this entire ordeal, never once making me feel guilty for prioritizing my sister's needs over our wedding plans, even as we watched our dream celebration shrink with each financial request. We landed at LAX on a Friday afternoon, the California sun blazing down as we collected our rental car. I had told Chloe we were coming despite her protests, but I hadn't given her our exact arrival time. Something told me that surprising her might be the only way to get honest answers about what was really going on. The address Chloe had given me for her apartment led us to a modest complex in mid-city, nowhere near the trendy West Hollywood area where she had claimed to be living. The building was older but well-maintained, with palm trees lining the parking area and a small pool visible through a chain-link fence. It looked like exactly the kind of place someone would choose if they were trying to live within their means, not the home of someone launching a fashion line with a major investor. We climbed the stairs to apartment 2B, my heart pounding with each step. I knocked softly at first, then more firmly when there was no response. After several minutes, I heard movement inside, followed by Chloe's muffled voice asking who was there. When I announced myself, there was a long pause before the door opened. The woman who greeted us was barely recognizable as my vibrant, confident sister. Chloe had lost significant weight, her once glowing skin now pale and drawn. Her famous curly hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that looked like she had been sleeping in them. But it was her eyes that shocked me the most. Gone was the spark of ambition and creativity that had always defined her. Instead, I saw fear, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief at being caught. She reluctantly invited us inside, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The apartment was tiny, barely large enough for a bed, a small table, and a kitchenette. But more concerning was what wasn't there. There was no design workspace, no fancy work clothes hanging in the closet, no evidence of the successful career she had been describing to me for months. Instead, the space felt temporary and sparse, like someone who was just passing through rather than building a life. A suitcase sat half-packed in the corner, and there were boxes scattered around as if she had been preparing to move again. Marcus introduced himself politely, but I could see him taking in the same details I was, his expression growing more concerned by the minute. Chloe barely acknowledged him, her attention focused entirely on me with a mixture of defiance and shame. I sat down on her small couch and asked the question I had been dreading. "Chloe, what's really going on? And please don't lie to me anymore." What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. Slowly, reluctantly, the truth began to emerge. There was no high-powered fashion job. There was no investor interested in her clothing line. There was no business opportunity that required $25,000 in startup capital. Chloe had been unemployed for over 8 months. The eviction from her previous apartment had been real, but it hadn't been her first. She had been moving from place to place, staying with friends, subletting rooms, and occasionally living in her car when she had nowhere else to go. The money I had sent her, all $60,000 of it, had gone toward basic survival. Rent, food, gas, phone bills, car payments, and the kind of everyday expenses that pile up when someone has no steady income. She had also used some of it to maintain the illusion of success, buying expensive coffee during our video calls so I wouldn't see her in fast food restaurants, purchasing a few designer pieces to wear during our conversations so I would believe her stories about networking events. As she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, I felt my world shifting beneath me. Every conversation we had shared over the past year had been built on lies. Every update about her career, every expression of gratitude for my help, every promise to pay me back, had been part of an elaborate fiction designed to keep the money flowing. Marcus reached for my hand as I struggled to process what I was hearing. The sister I thought I knew, the one I had trusted with my entire wedding fund, had been manipulating me for months. She had taken my love for her and weaponized it, using my desire to help family as a way to solve her own problems. But perhaps the most devastating revelation was still to come. When I asked about her plans to pay me back, Chloe finally looked me in the eye and said the words that shattered my heart completely. She couldn't pay me back. She had no income, no savings, no prospects for the kind of employment that would allow her to repay $60,000. She had never had a realistic plan for returning the money, had never intended for these to be loans in the traditional sense. In her mind, this was simply family helping family, with no expectation of repayment. The room fell silent except for the sound of traffic outside and my own ragged breathing. I stared at my sister, trying to reconcile the person sitting in front of me with the woman I had thought I knew my entire life. How had she been able to lie so easily, so convincingly, for so long? Marcus squeezed my hand tighter, and I could feel his anger on my behalf, even as he remained silent and let me handle the conversation. His presence gave me the strength to ask the hardest question of all. Why? Why had she done this to me? Why had she taken advantage of my love and trust? Why had she jeopardized my wedding, my financial security, my peace of mind? Chloe's answer revealed a depth of resentment I had never suspected. Through tears, she told me that she had always felt like the unsuccessful sister, the one who took risks while I played it safe, the one who struggled while I prospered. She had convinced herself that I owed her this help, that my stable life and healthy savings account were somehow unfair advantages that should be shared. She had also convinced herself that the money didn't really matter to me, that I had so much saved that $60,000 was just a drop in the bucket. She claimed she didn't realize how significantly it would impact my wedding plans, though I found that impossible to believe given how detailed I had been about our budget and timeline. Most painfully, she admitted that she had continued lying because she was terrified of losing me. She knew that telling the truth would mean facing my anger and disappointment, and she couldn't bear the straight-a-coquille thought of our relationship ending. So she had kept spinning more elaborate stories, hoping that somehow she would figure out a way to make it all true. As I sat in that tiny apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my sister's deception, I felt something inside me break. This wasn't just about money, though the financial impact was devastating. This was about trust, honesty, and the fundamental bonds that hold a family together. Chloe had taken all of those things and gambled them away for short-term relief from her problems. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. Marcus rose with me, his hand on my back providing support I desperately needed. I looked at Chloe one last time, taking in her tear-stained face and slumped shoulders. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many questions I still had, so much anger and hurt that needed to be expressed. But in that moment, I felt too raw, too broken to find the right words. Instead, I simply told her that I needed time to think, to process what I had learned, to figure out what came next. We left the apartment in silence, Marcus guiding me down the stairs, and back to our rental car. I sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead as he drove us back toward our hotel, my mind completely numb. The next few hours passed in a blur. Marcus held me while I cried, ordered room service when I couldn't imagine eating, and listened without judgment as I tried to make sense of what had happened. He didn't offer advice or try to tell me how to feel. He simply stayed with me as I worked through the shock and betrayal. By the next morning, the numbness had given way to a cold, clear anger. I had trusted Chloe with my most precious resource, my carefully saved money that represented years of sacrifice and planning. She had taken that trust and used it to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford, all while lying to my face about her intentions and her ability to repay me. But beyond the money, she had stolen something even more valuable. She had taken the joy out of my engagement, the excitement of planning my wedding, the security I had felt about my future with Marcus. Every conversation we had shared about my wedding plans had been tainted by her secret knowledge that she was steadily depleting the fund that would make those plans possible. Marcus and I cut our trip short, changing our flights to return home that afternoon. There was nothing more to be gained from staying in Los Angeles, and I needed to be in my own space to figure out how to move forward. During the flight home, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to take legal action to recover my money. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. Chloe had obtained money under false pretenses, with no intention or ability to repay it. The fact that she was my sister didn't give her the right to destroy my financial security. Marcus supported my decision completely, offering to help me find a good attorney and to provide whatever testimony might be needed. He had seen firsthand the impact of Chloe's deception, and he understood that this was about more than just getting the money back. It was about holding her accountable for her actions and protecting ourselves from further manipulation. The legal process was emotionally draining but necessary. My attorney explained that while family financial disputes were always complicated, the documentation I had of Chloe's lies and misrepresentations strengthened my case considerably. The text messages where she had promised specific repayment timelines, the stories about job opportunities and business investments that had never existed, all of it painted a clear picture of intentional deception. Chloe initially tried to claim that the money had been gifts rather than loans, but her own messages contradicted that assertion. She had repeatedly used the word loan and had made specific promises about repayment that she never intended to keep. The legal proceedings forced Chloe to provide a full accounting of how she had spent the money. What we discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Beyond basic living expenses, she had used thousands of dollars on luxury items and experiences that she couldn't afford: designer handbags, expensive dinners, spa treatments, and even a brief vacation to Mexico that she had never mentioned to me. She had been living a fantasy life funded by my wedding money, maintaining an image of success that was completely divorced from reality. The depth of her financial irresponsibility was staggering, and it became clear that even if she had found employment, she would never have been able to repay the full amount. The court ultimately ruled in my favor, ordering Chloe to repay the $60,000 plus interest and legal fees. However, winning the judgment was only the first step. Actually collecting the money would prove to be much more challenging. Chloe had no assets to seize, no income to garnish, no property to claim. She had been living paycheck to paycheck for so long that there was nothing left to recover. The court order was a piece of paper that validated my claims but did nothing to actually return my money. Meanwhile, my wedding was just 6 weeks away, and Marcus and I were scrambling to finalize arrangements with our drastically reduced budget. The venue we had settled on was a community center that we could rent for a fraction of the cost of our original choice. Instead of a professional photographer, Marcus's cousin would take pictures with his high-end camera. My dress came from a discount bridal shop, and our flowers would be whatever we could find at the farmer's market the morning of the wedding. Each compromise felt like a small death, a reminder of what Chloe's betrayal had cost us. But Marcus remained positive and supportive, reminding me that the most important thing was that we were getting married, not how much money we spent on the celebration. His attitude helped me maintain perspective, but I couldn't shake the anger and hurt that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. Every time I thought about my sister, every time I remembered the lies she had told or the promises she had broken, I felt the same surge of betrayal all over again. Our mother had been devastated when I told her what had happened. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs of Chloe's problems, for not intervening sooner when it became clear that her older daughter was struggling. She offered to help pay for the wedding, but her teacher's salary didn't leave much room for major expenses. And I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else sacrificing for a celebration that had already cost too much. The hardest part was the complete radio silence from Chloe herself. After the legal proceedings concluded, she had stopped all communication with me and our mother. Her phone had been disconnected, and she had apparently moved out of the apartment where we had confronted her. She had simply vanished from our lives, leaving behind nothing but legal documents and a trail of financial destruction. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a call from an unknown California number. My heart jumped, thinking it might be Chloe finally ready to apologize or explain herself further. Instead, it was a woman named Sarah who identified herself as Chloe's former roommate. Sarah had found my contact information among Chloe's abandoned belongings and wanted me to know that my sister had left town completely. She had packed up whatever she could fit in her car and headed east, claiming she was going to start over somewhere new where nobody knew about her problems. But Sarah had more disturbing news. Chloe had pulled similar schemes with other people, including Sarah herself. She had borrowed money from friends, co-workers, even casual acquaintances, always with elaborate stories about temporary setbacks and guaranteed repayment plans. Sarah estimated that Chloe owed money to at least a dozen different people, with amounts ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just the victim of a desperate sister making poor choices. I was the latest mark in what appeared to be a pattern of predatory behavior. Chloe had become a serial borrower, using her charm and family connections to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The woman I had thought I knew, the sister I had loved and trusted my entire life, was apparently someone else entirely. The creative, ambitious young woman struggling to make it in a difficult industry was just another fiction. Another story designed to elicit sympathy and financial support. Marcus found me crying in our kitchen after that phone call, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I broke down completely. The grief wasn't just about the money anymore, though that remained devastating. It was about mourning the loss of someone who had never really existed, grieving for a relationship that had been built on lies from the very beginning. How long had Chloe been manipulating me? Had any of our recent conversations been genuine? Or had every interaction been calculated to maintain my trust and keep the money flowing? Had she ever really cared about my wedding, my happiness, my future with Marcus? Or had I simply been a convenient source of funding for her increasingly desperate situation? These questions haunted me as Marcus and I put the finishing touches on our scaled-down wedding preparations. Every vendor meeting, every decision about flowers or music or food was shadowed by the knowledge of what we had originally planned and what we had been forced to give up. But something unexpected began to happen in those final weeks before the wedding. As we worked together to create something beautiful within our new constraints, Marcus and I discovered a different kind of intimacy and partnership. We were no longer planning a wedding based on a fantasy budget. We were creating a celebration that reflected our actual values and priorities. The community center where we would hold our reception was the same place where Marcus had volunteered as a tutor for underprivileged kids. The farmers' market flowers would be fresher and more meaningful than anything we could have ordered from an expensive florist. Our smaller guest list meant that everyone in attendance would be someone who truly mattered to us, rather than distant relatives and acquaintances we felt obligated to invite. Most importantly, the adversity we had faced together had strengthened our relationship in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus had seen me at my most vulnerable, had supported me through betrayal and disappointment, had helped me make difficult decisions without ever making me feel judged or criticized. His unconditional love and support during this crisis had shown me exactly the kind of partner he would be throughout our marriage. 3 days before the wedding, I made a decision that surprised even Marcus. I stopped trying to collect the money from Chloe. I instructed my attorney to halt all collection efforts and to consider the matter closed from my end. This wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it certainly wasn't because I no longer cared about the financial impact of her actions. Rather, it was a recognition that continuing to pursue someone who had already disappeared from my life was only prolonging my own suffering. Every legal document, every phone call with my attorney, every attempt to track down my sister was keeping me tied to the betrayal instead of allowing me to move forward. The money was gone, and it was never coming back. Chloe had made her choices, and now I needed to make mine. I could spend years angry and bitter, constantly reliving the hurt and disappointment. Or I could choose to focus on building a future with Marcus that wasn't defined by my sister's betrayal. This decision brought me a peace I hadn't expected. For the first time in months, I could think about my upcoming wedding without immediately thinking about everything it wasn't. I could appreciate the beauty in our simple plans without constantly comparing them to our original vision. The night before our wedding, Marcus and I sat on our apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the Portland skyline. The air was cool and crisp, with the first hints of autumn beginning to show in the changing leaves of the trees below us. We talked about everything we had been through together, from our first meeting in college to this moment on the eve of our marriage. The conversation inevitably turned to Chloe and the impact her actions had had on our relationship. Marcus told me something that night that I will never forget. He said that while he hated what Chloe had done to me, he was grateful for the way it had tested our partnership. He had learned that I was someone who would sacrifice for family, who valued loyalty and love over money and material things. He had seen me make difficult decisions with grace and strength, and it had only deepened his love and respect for me. I realized that he was right. The crisis had revealed things about both of us that we might never have discovered otherwise. We had faced financial stress, family betrayal, and major disappointments together, and we had emerged stronger and more united than before. As I fell asleep that night, for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what Chloe had taken from me. Instead, I was thinking about what Marcus and I had built together, and what we would continue to build in the years to come. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect September weather that feels like a gift from the universe. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, having spent the night at my mother's house according to tradition, and felt a sense of calm and joy that had been absent for so long. My mother helped me get ready, carefully arranging my simple veil and adjusting the modest dress I had chosen from the discount shop. It wasn't the elaborate gown I had originally envisioned, but it was beautiful in its own way, and more importantly, it was mine. No one else's choices or deceptions had any power over this moment. The community center had been transformed overnight by our friends and family. Mason jars filled with farmers' market flowers adorned every table, and string lights that Marcus had hung himself created a warm, intimate atmosphere. Everything was simple and understated, but it was also genuine and heartfelt in a way that our original elaborate plans might not have been. As I walked down the aisle toward Marcus, I saw only love and support in the faces of our guests. These were the people who truly mattered, the ones who had stood by us through difficulty and celebration alike. My mother's proud smile, Marcus's best friend wiping away tears, my college roommates beaming from the front row, all of it felt perfect and right, and exactly as it should be. When Marcus and I exchanged vows, promising to support each other through whatever challenges life might bring, the words carried extra weight because of everything we had already weathered together. We weren't just promising to love each other in theory. We were promising to continue the kind of partnership we had already proven we could sustain. The reception was exactly what we had hoped for, intimate and joyful and full of genuine celebration. Our friends gave heartfelt toasts, we danced to music that meant something to us, and we shared a simple but delicious cake that Marcus's mother had made herself. As the evening wound down and our guests began to head home, Marcus and I stood together in the quiet community center, surrounded by the remnants of our celebration. Empty mason jars, scattered flower petals, and the kind of gentle chaos that follows any good party. Looking around at what we had created together, I realized that this wedding, born out of betrayal and financial constraint, had been more meaningful and authentic than anything we could have purchased with my original budget. We had been forced to focus on what truly mattered, to strip away the expensive veneer, and build something real and lasting. The absence of Chloe from this day was still painful, but it was no longer the defining feature of our celebration. She had chosen not to be part of our lives, had chosen deception over honesty, had chosen her own immediate needs over our relationship. Those were her choices, and while they had consequences for me, they didn't have to define my future. As Marcus and I drove away from our reception venue, headed for a modest but romantic honeymoon weekend at the Oregon coast, I felt a sense of closure about the entire ordeal. Not because everything had been resolved or because all the hurt had disappeared, but because I had finally accepted that some betrayals can't be fixed, some relationships can't be saved, and some losses have to be grieved before they can be released. The wedding fund was gone, and so was the sister I thought I knew. But in their place, I had discovered something even more valuable. A partnership built on truth, a marriage founded on genuine love and mutual support, and a strength I hadn't known I possessed. 3 years have passed since that day, and Marcus and I have built a beautiful life together, based on honest communication and shared values. We've purchased our first home, traveled to places we had only dreamed of, and created the kind of stable, loving partnership that I had always hoped for but never fully understood until we were tested by adversity. I still think about Chloe sometimes, wondering where she is and whether she ever found a way to live honestly. I hope she did, for her own sake if not for mine. But I no longer carry anger or resentment about what happened between us. Her choices were hers to make, just as my choices were mine. The greatest gift Marcus and I received from that painful experience was the knowledge that we could weather any storm together, that our love was strong enough to survive betrayal and disappointment and financial stress. Every challenge we've faced since then has felt manageable, because we know what we're capable of when we work as a team. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that teach us what truly matters. In losing my wedding fund, I gained something far more valuable: the certainty that I had chosen the right partner for this journey, and the confidence that whatever life might bring us, we would face it together with honesty, love, and unwavering support for each other. The morning after our 3rd wedding anniversary, I woke up to an email that made my blood run cold. It was from someone named Jennifer Walsh, and the subject line read, "Your sister Chloe, urgent family matter." My hands trembled as I opened the message, Marcus still sleeping peacefully beside me. Jennifer introduced herself as a social worker from Denver General Hospital. Chloe had been in a serious car accident and was in intensive care. During the intake process, she had listed me as her emergency contact, despite the fact that we hadn't spoken in over 3 years. The hospital needed someone to make medical decisions if Chloe became unable to do so herself. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to process the flood of emotions washing over me. Anger, hurt, confusion, and underneath it all, a deep sadness that surprised me with its intensity. Despite everything that had happened between us, Chloe was still my sister, and the thought of her lying alone in a hospital bed was devastating. Marcus stirred beside me, immediately sensing my distress. When I showed him the email, his face went through the same range of emotions I was experiencing. He had every reason to hate Chloe for what she had done to us, but his first instinct was the same as mine. We had to go to Denver. The flight felt endless, my mind cycling through memories of Chloe and me as children, back when our biggest worry was who got to pick the TV channel. I thought about the promises we had made to each other after Dad died, how we had sworn to always be there for each other no matter what. Those promises felt both sacred and completely shattered. Denver General Hospital was a massive complex of concrete and glass, the kind of place where hope and despair existed side by side in sterile hallways. Jennifer Walsh met us in the family waiting area, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had the gentle but direct manner of someone who delivered difficult news for a living. Chloe's injuries were severe, but not life-threatening. She had suffered a traumatic brain injury, multiple broken bones, and internal bleeding that had required emergency surgery. She was stable but unconscious, and the doctors weren't sure when or if she would wake up. What Jennifer told us next was perhaps more shocking than the accident itself. Chloe had been living under an assumed name in Denver for the past 2 years, working as a waitress at a truck stop diner, and living in a rundown motel by the week. She had no insurance, no savings, no one who even knew her real identity except for the fake ID she had been using to get by. The police had found our mother's obituary in Chloe's belongings, along with my contact information written on a scrap of paper. That was how they had tracked me down as her next of kin. The obituary was dated 8 months ago, and I realized with a sick feeling that Chloe had somehow learned of our mother's sudden heart attack, but had never reached out to me about it. Our mother had died alone, and I had gone through the grief and funeral arrangements without my sister, never knowing that she was aware of what had happened. The layers of deception and loss felt overwhelming, each revelation adding another weight to my already heavy heart. Jennifer explained that someone needed to make decisions about Chloe's ongoing care. The hospital could only keep her for so long without payment, and her condition would require extensive rehabilitation if she recovered consciousness. Without family intervention, she would likely end up in a state facility with minimal care. As we walked through the ICU toward Chloe's room, I tried to prepare myself for what I would see. Nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The vibrant, beautiful sister I remembered was gone, replaced by a frail woman connected to machines, her face swollen and bruised beyond recognition. I stood beside her bed, studying her features for some sign of the person I had once known better than anyone else in the world. Her wild curly hair had been cut short and was now streaked with gray. Her hands, once always moving as she sketched or gestured while talking, lay still and pale against the white sheets. Marcus waited quietly by the door, giving me space to process this reunion I had never imagined would happen. The room was filled with the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whoosh of the ventilator helping Chloe breathe. It was the sound of a life hanging in the balance, entirely dependent on machines and the decisions of others. A nurse named Patricia came in to check Chloe's vitals and noticed my distress. She had been caring for my sister since the accident and spoke about her with genuine warmth. Even unconscious, Chloe had apparently made an impression with her fighting spirit and the peaceful expression she wore despite her injuries. Patricia mentioned that Chloe had been talking in her sleep during the first few days, calling out names and having what seemed like conversations with people who weren't there. My name had come up frequently, along with mentions of wedding dresses and promises she needed to keep. That night, Marcus and I checked into a hotel near the hospital, both of us emotionally drained by the day's revelations. We ordered room service and sat in silence for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts about this impossible situation. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice gentle but concerned. He asked what I wanted to do, making it clear that whatever I decided, he would support me completely. But he also reminded me that I had no obligation to Chloe, that the betrayal 3 years ago had severed any family bonds that might have once existed between us. I knew he was right from a practical standpoint. Chloe had made her choices, had chosen deception and manipulation over honesty and family connection. She had disappeared from my life completely, even when our mother died, showing no interest in maintaining any relationship with me. But lying in that hospital bed, she looked so vulnerable and alone. The woman who had once commanded attention wherever she went, who had been so confident in her ability to charm and manipulate others, was now entirely dependent on the kindness of strangers. Over the next few days, I spent hours sitting beside Chloe's bed, reading to her from books I thought she might enjoy, and playing music that reminded me of our childhood. The nurses encouraged this, saying that familiar voices and sounds could sometimes help coma patients find their way back to consciousness. During these long vigils, I found myself talking to her about everything that had happened since we last spoke. I told her about our mother's death and how much I had missed having my sister there to share the grief. I talked about my marriage to Marcus, about the home we had built together, about the life I had created from the ashes of her betrayal. I also found myself remembering the good times we had shared, the countless hours of laughter and secrets and dreams we had spun together as children and young adults. Those memories felt both precious and painful, reminders of what we had lost and what might have been if different choices had been made. On the 4th day of my vigil, something unexpected happened. I was reading aloud from a book of poetry that Chloe had loved in college when I noticed her fingers moving slightly. At first I thought it might be an involuntary reflex, but then her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but definitely conscious. The next few minutes were a blur of nurses and doctors rushing in to assess her condition. Chloe was disoriented and confused, unable to remember the accident or even where she was, but she was awake and responsive. The medical team cautiously optimistic about her chances for recovery. though they warned that brain injuries were unpredictable and her road to healing would be long and difficult. When the medical team finally left us alone, Chloe turned her head toward me with obvious effort. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the breathing tube, but her words were clear enough to understand. She said my name and then, with tears streaming down her bruised face, she said the words I had waited 3 years to hear. "I'm sorry." What followed was the most honest conversation Chloe and I had ever had. Over the course of several days, as her strength slowly returned, she told me the truth about what had happened after she disappeared from Los Angeles. The shame and guilt over what she had done to me had consumed her, making it impossible for her to face our family or try to rebuild any kind of normal life. She had driven east with no particular destination in mind, stopping in Denver only because her car had broken down and she couldn't afford to fix it. She had sold the car for parts and used the money to survive while looking for work, but her lack of references and her fear of background checks had limited her options severely. The fake identity had been a desperate attempt to start over completely, to become someone who hadn't hurt the people she loved most. But living a lie, even with good intentions, had proven to be its own kind of prison. She had been isolated and lonely, working menial jobs and living in poverty, all while knowing that her real family thought she was a monster. She had learned about our mother's death through an online obituary search, something she did periodically to check on our family from a distance. The news had devastated her, but she had convinced herself that she had forfeited the right to grieve publicly or to comfort me in my loss. As Chloe spoke, I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, but I could also see the damage that years of guilt and self-imposed exile had done to her spirit. The confident, vibrant woman I had once known had been replaced by someone who seemed to have lost all sense of self-worth and hope for the future. The financial restitution I had never expected came in the form of information rather than money. Chloe told me about a safety deposit box she had maintained in Los Angeles, paid for years in advance, where she had stored some valuable jewelry that had belonged to our grandmother. She had always intended to sell these pieces to begin paying me back, but her flight from California had made accessing them impossible. More importantly, she provided me with detailed information about some of the other people she had defrauded over the years. She had kept meticulous records of every loan, every lie, every person she had hurt, as if documenting her sins might somehow make them easier to bear or undo. This information allowed me to connect with some of her other victims, people who had been searching for her just as unsuccessfully as the legal system had. While it didn't immediately result in financial recovery for any of us, it did provide a sense of closure and validation that many of us had been lacking. The weeks that followed were emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Chloe's physical recovery was complicated by her lack of insurance and limited financial resources. The hospital was pressuring us to make arrangements for her ongoing care, but the options were limited and expensive. Marcus and I had long discussions about what we were willing and able to do. We had built a good life for ourselves, but taking on the financial responsibility for Chloe's care would require significant sacrifices. More challenging was the emotional question of whether we were ready to allow someone who had betrayed us so deeply back into our lives. The decision was ultimately made easier by Chloe herself. As her mental clarity returned, she became increasingly distressed about the burden she was placing on us. She begged us not to sacrifice our financial security for her medical bills, saying that she had already taken too much from us and couldn't bear to take more. Instead, she asked for something that was both easier and harder to give: forgiveness. Not forgiveness that would erase the past or restore our relationship to what it had once been, but forgiveness that would allow all of us to move forward without the poison of unresolved anger. This was perhaps the most difficult conversation I had ever had. Sitting in that sterile hospital room looking at my sister, who was both completely familiar and utterly changed, I had to decide what forgiveness meant to me and what I was capable of offering. I told Chloe that I forgave her for the deception and the theft, not because what she had done was acceptable, but because carrying that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting her. I forgave her for disappearing during our mother's illness and death, understanding that shame had kept her away even though I had needed her support. But I also told her that forgiveness didn't mean trust. and trust was something that would have to be rebuilt slowly if it could be rebuilt at all. I explained that Marcus and I had our own life to protect, and while we wanted to help her get back on her feet, we couldn't allow her problems to become our problems again. Chloe accepted these conditions with more grace than I had expected. She seemed to understand that any relationship we might have in the future would be different from what we had shared in the past, built on honesty rather than blind loyalty, on respect rather than manipulation. With the help of the hospital social worker, we arranged for Chloe to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility that would accept her case based on her indigent status. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was clean and safe, with staff who seemed genuinely committed to helping their patients recover. Before we left Denver, Chloe gave me the key to the safety deposit box in Los Angeles and signed papers authorizing me to access it. She also provided contact information for a lawyer who had been trying to track her down regarding a class action lawsuit against one of her former employers. There was apparently a settlement pending that could provide her with some financial stability if she was willing to come forward with her real identity. The most meaningful moment came just before we said goodbye. Chloe took my hand in both of hers and looked directly into my eyes. She told me that she was proud of the life I had built with Marcus, proud of the strength I had shown in the face of her betrayal, and grateful that I had turned out to be the better person between us. She also made me promise that I wouldn't let guilt about her situation interfere with my happiness. She said that the only way she could live with what she had done was if she knew that I was living a full, joyful life despite her actions. Marcus and I flew back to Portland that evening, both of us emotionally drained, but oddly at peace. The chapter of our lives that had been defined by Chloe's betrayal and disappearance was finally closing, replaced by something more complex but ultimately more honest. Over the following months, we received occasional updates from the rehabilitation facility. Chloe was making steady progress physically, learning to walk again and regaining her cognitive abilities. More importantly, she was participating in counseling sessions that seemed to be helping her address the deeper issues that had led to her pattern of deception and manipulation. I made one trip to Los Angeles to access the safety deposit box, bringing Marcus with me for support. The jewelry Chloe had mentioned was indeed valuable, worth approximately $15,000 according to the appraiser we consulted. It wasn't enough to fully compensate for what she had taken from me, but it felt symbolic nonetheless. Rather than keeping the money, Marcus and I decided to use it to establish a small fund that would help Chloe transition back to independent living when she was ready. It felt like the right balance between forgiveness and accountability, a way of helping without enabling. The class action settlement Chloe had mentioned turned out to be legitimate, providing her with a modest but important source of income. With the help of her social worker, she was able to apply for disability benefits and eventually find subsidized housing in a program designed for people recovering from traumatic brain injuries. About a year after the accident, I received a letter from Chloe. It was the first direct communication we had had since leaving her at the rehabilitation facility, and I approached it with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The letter was different from any communication I had ever received from her before. It was straightforward and honest, without the dramatic flourishes or manipulative undertones that had characterized so much of our past correspondence. She updated me on her recovery progress, her living situation, and her ongoing therapy work. Most importantly, she thanked me for the forgiveness I had offered and for the financial help that had made her transition possible. She made no requests for additional support and no suggestions about rebuilding our relationship. Instead, she simply expressed gratitude for the chance to start over and hoped that someday she might become someone worthy of the trust she had once violated. The letter ended with a revelation that surprised me. Chloe had begun volunteering at a nonprofit organization that helped people struggling with addiction and financial problems. She was using her own experiences with deception and manipulation to help others recognize and address similar patterns in their own lives. Reading about this work gave me hope that something positive might ultimately come from all the pain and destruction of the past. If Chloe could use her experiences to help others avoid similar mistakes, then perhaps some meaning could be salvaged from the wreckage of our relationship. Marcus and I talked extensively about how to respond to her letter. We ultimately decided to send a brief but warm reply, acknowledging her progress and expressing genuine happiness about her volunteer work. We kept the tone friendly but maintained appropriate boundaries, neither encouraging nor discouraging further contact. This pattern continued for the next 2 years. Chloe would send an occasional letter updating us on her life, and we would respond with brief, supportive messages. The communication was cordial but distant, like the relationship you might have with a former colleague, rather than a close family member. During this time, Marcus and I continued building our own life together. We purchased a larger home in a neighborhood we loved, took wonderful vacations, and deepened our friendships with people who shared our values. The financial damage from Chloe's theft had been largely repaired through our own hard work and careful saving. More importantly, the emotional healing that had begun in that Denver hospital room had continued. I no longer felt the sharp stab of anger when I thought about Chloe, and I had stopped second-guessing every financial decision based on the fear of being taken advantage of again. The 5th anniversary of our marriage was approaching when Chloe sent a letter that was different from all the others. Instead of a general update, it was a specific invitation. The nonprofit where she volunteered was hosting a fundraising dinner, and she was being honored for her work with their financial literacy program. She wanted us to know about the event but made it clear that she wasn't expecting us to attend. She simply thought we might be interested to know that she was being recognized for helping others, and that the work she was doing had grown out of her determination to make amends for her past actions. The invitation presented us with a choice we hadn't expected to face. For 5 years, our contact with Chloe had been safely distant, mediated by letters and carefully controlled. Attending this event would mean seeing her in person for the first time since the hospital, being in the same room, and having to navigate the complex emotions that direct contact would inevitably bring up. Marcus left the decision entirely up to me, promising to support whatever choice I made. After much consideration, I decided that I wanted to go, not because I was ready to fully reconcile with Chloe, but because I was curious about the person she had become and the work she was doing. The nonprofit was located in a modest community center in a working-class neighborhood of Denver. The fundraising dinner was a simple affair, with folding tables covered in donated tablecloths and a buffet of home-cooked food prepared by volunteers. When I saw Chloe across the room, I was struck by how different she looked from the broken woman in the hospital bed. She was still clearly marked by her experiences, moving with a slight limp from her accident injuries and speaking with a deliberate carefulness that suggested ongoing challenges with her traumatic brain injury. But there was something in her demeanor that I hadn't seen in years: peace. She was standing with a group of people who were clearly participants in her program, laughing at something one of them had said, and offering encouragement to another who seemed nervous about the evening's activities. The easy warmth of these interactions was so different from the calculated charm I remembered from her manipulative years. When our eyes met across the room, Chloe's face lit up with genuine surprise and joy. She excused herself from her group and walked over to us, moving slowly but steadily. When she reached us, she stopped, just out of arm's reach, clearly uncertain about what kind of greeting would be appropriate. I made the decision for both of us, stepping forward to give her a careful hug. She felt fragile in my arms, smaller than I remembered, but there was a solidness to her presence that spoke of hard-won stability. The evening that followed was both awkward and beautiful. Chloe introduced us to her colleagues and program participants, and I could see the genuine respect and affection they had for her. The work she was doing was clearly meaningful and effective, helping people who had made financial mistakes learn to rebuild their lives with honesty and accountability. During the program portion of the evening, Chloe gave a brief speech about her own journey from deception to recovery. She spoke honestly about the people she had hurt and the damage she had caused, but she also talked about the possibility of redemption through service to others. She mentioned me specifically, thanking me for the forgiveness that had made her recovery possible and for the example of strength and integrity that had shown her what she wanted to become. It was embarrassing and moving at the same time, a public acknowledgement of our shared history that felt both healing and final. After the formal program ended, the three of us found a quiet corner where we could talk privately. Chloe asked about our lives, our work, our plans for the future, and seemed genuinely interested in the details of the happiness we had built together. She also shared more about her own journey, the challenges of recovery from brain injury, the slow process of rebuilding trust with herself and others, and the satisfaction she found in helping people who reminded her of who she used to be. The conversation was honest but not intimate, caring but not close. We were three adults who shared a complicated history, finding a way to acknowledge the past without being controlled by it. As the evening came to an end, Chloe walked us to our car. Before we said goodbye, she handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a photo of the three of us from childhood, back when we were all innocent and full of hope. On the back, she had written a simple message: "Thank you for helping me remember who I used to be, and for showing me who I could become." The drive back to our hotel was quiet, both Marcus and I processing the emotions of the evening. I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't expected, as if a door that had been left slightly ajar for years had finally been gently closed. We flew home the next morning, and I realized that I no longer thought of Chloe as my sister in the way I once had. She was someone I had once loved deeply, someone who had hurt me profoundly, and someone who had ultimately found a way to transform her worst qualities into a force for good in the world. That felt like enough. Not forgiveness in the sense of restored relationship, but forgiveness in the sense of released resentment. Not reconciliation, but resolution. 6 months later, we received a wedding invitation that surprised us both. Chloe was marrying Robert, a fellow volunteer at the nonprofit, someone who knew her full history and had chosen to love her anyway. The invitation was simple and honest, much like the person Chloe had apparently become. We sent a generous wedding gift, but didn't attend the ceremony. Some boundaries, once established, need to be maintained for the health of everyone involved. But we genuinely wished her happiness and hoped that she had finally found the peace and stability that had eluded her for so many years. Today, 7 years after that terrible discovery in the garage and 5 years after the accident that brought us back together, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for every part of this journey. The betrayal taught me the difference between love and enabling, between forgiveness and foolishness. The recovery showed me the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds when all parties are committed to honesty and growth. Marcus and I have built a marriage based on trust, communication, and shared values. We've learned to support each other through difficulties, without sacrificing our own well-being for someone else's poor choices. We've discovered that love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior, and that forgiveness doesn't require restoring damaged relationships. Most importantly, we've learned that some of life's greatest gifts come disguised as devastating losses. In losing my wedding fund, I gained a deeper understanding of what really matters in marriage. In losing the sister I thought I knew, I gained the wisdom to recognize authentic relationships versus manipulative ones. The money Chloe stole was eventually replaced through our own hard work and careful planning. The trust she violated was rebuilt through Marcus's unwavering loyalty and honesty. The family bonds she severed were replaced by the chosen family of friends who have proven their worth through years of consistent support. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Chloe had been honest with me from the beginning about her struggles. If she had asked for help without deception, if she had admitted her problems instead of creating elaborate fantasies, if she had treated our relationship as something valuable enough to preserve rather than something expendable enough to exploit. But those questions belong to a different story, one that might have been but never was. The story we actually lived, with all its pain and betrayal and eventual healing, has made us stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the genuine love we've found with each other. The most important lesson I've learned is that family isn't just about blood relations or shared history. It's about the people who choose to show up for each other consistently, who tell the truth even when it's difficult, who support each other's growth without enabling destructive behavior. By that definition, Marcus is my truest family, and the friends who stood by us through the worst of this ordeal are the siblings I actually want. Chloe will always be part of my history, but she's no longer part of my daily life, and that's exactly as it should be. Some stories end with dramatic reconciliation, with relationships restored and families reunited. This story ends with something I find more valuable: boundaries respected, lessons learned, and peace achieved through accepting what can't be changed while actively creating what can be. I hope that wherever Chloe is now, she's continuing to find meaning in helping others and to build honest relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. I hope her marriage is happy and her work continues to make a difference in people's lives. But mostly, I hope that anyone who hears this story understands that it's possible to love someone and still protect yourself from them, to forgive someone without forgetting the lessons their actions taught you, and to find happiness and peace even after the deepest betrayals. Trust is precious precisely because it can be broken. Love is valuable because it can be lost. And forgiveness is powerful because it frees the forgiver more than the forgiven. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.